patria o muerte.
Episode 10, The Vacuum Problem. 1. The Silence of Success. Power does not disappear. It relocates. Every political system that has ever collapsed made the same fatal mistake. It assumed that removing an authority was equivalent to removing domination. The revolutionaries burn the palace, execute the king, and declare freedom, only to find that within a decade, they have built a new prison out of the rubble of the old. History is unambiguous on this point. When hierarchy dissolves faster than meaning, something older than politics resurfaces. Not ideology. Not belief. Tribe. Chapter 10 opens with a phenomenon the models had flagged but grossly underestimated. They called it the vacuum problem. On the surface, the ultramarine system was performing exactly as designed. It was a masterpiece of logistical engineering. Resource allocation had stabilized, no one starved. Conflict rates had dropped to historical lows, there were no wars, only disputes. Life expectancy rose as stress cortisol levels fell. Participation literacy, the ability of the average citizen to understand complex trade-offs, was higher than any Ivy League faculty of the 20th century. By every measurable metric, the probability of civilizational collapse had declined to near zero. And yet, anomalies multiplied. They did not appear in the economic dashboards. The GDP was fine. The energy grid was green. They appeared in the behavioral noise. Psychologists began reporting a spike in existential lethargy. Sociologists tracked the emergence of micropatterns of association that made no rational sense. Emergent subcultures. Mimetic clustering. People were not resisting the system. They weren't protesting for better wages or more rights. They were withdrawing from meaning. The collapse of religion and nationalism had been expected. It was even welcomed by the architects as a necessary hygiene measure. But what replaced them was not the rational, stoic civic identity they had planned for. It was fragmentation. Hyperlocal affiliations took root. Aesthetic tribes formed around shared tastes in music, fashion, or obscure historical eras, treating these preferences with the gravity of a religion. Algorithmic cults emerged without doctrine, groups of millions synchronized by a hashtag, united by a vibe, empty of metaphysics. Identity shells built around symbols that had been hollowed out. The system had successfully neutralized indoctrination. But it had not solved belonging. 2. The oldest variable. This is where the ultramarine architects encountered the oldest unsolved variable in political theory, the ghost in the machine that no code could exorcise. Humans do not live on governance alone. They live on myth density. A human being can survive without food for weeks, without water for days, but without meaning, they disintegrate instantly. And the commonwealth of survival was a desert of meaning. It was efficient, clean, fair, and safe. And it was unbearably dry. The empires noticed this before the system's own moderators did. They were looking for the cracks. American analysts in the remnants of the State Department reframed the Ultramarine project again. They stopped seeing it as governance infrastructure and started seeing it as a post-myth society experiment. Their conclusion was stark. Post-myth societies are stable only while material conditions improve rapidly. As soon as growth stagnates, the boredom reactivates violence. China's models converged on a similar insight from a different angle. They looked at their own history. Confucian continuity, stripped of transcendence, collapses into instrumental obedience. If the rituals are empty, the compliance becomes brittle. Russia, unsurprisingly, understood this instinctively. They didn't need a computer model. They had Dostoevsky. They called it the hollowing. A civilization without myth does not revolt. It implodes. So they adjusted their strategy. No longer acceleration through chaos, bombing supply chains was too crude. But injection through narrative. 3. The synthetic gods. They did not attack the ultramarine system directly. They didn't hack the power grid. They seeded it. Russian intelligence units, repurposed from cyber warfare to mimetic engineering, began injecting synthetic belief clusters into the open networks of the ultramarine world. They looked like harmless neo-spiritual frameworks disguised as personal development apps. They looked like anti-indoctrination movements that paradoxically functioned as indoctrination vectors. They weren't selling gods. Gods were too obvious. They were selling stories. Stories about human exceptionalism. You are special, not just a node. Stories about lost destiny. We were meant for more than safety. Stories about the soul versus the machine. The algorithm cannot love you. None of them were provably false. All of them were emotionally irresistible. Information warfare evolved again. It wasn't about fake news. It was about fake meaning. The system responded algorithmically, as designed. The AI moderators flagged coordinated narrative emergence. They throttled the amplification of these viral myths. They increased transparency, showing exactly where the stories came from. But narratives adapt faster than filters. Every suppression strengthened the sense of forbidden truth. Why are they hiding this story? The youth asked. It must be real. For the first time, the ultramarine moderators faced a dilemma with no clean solution. Suppress meaning, and be accused of the very tyranny you were born to destroy. Allow it, and risk the fragmentation of the entire civilizational stack. 4. The continuity statement. This is where she intervened personally. Until now, the woman, the architect, had remained deliberately distant. She was not a queen. She was not a president. She was a system administrator. The system was not meant to revolve around individuals. But individuals matter when myths decay. Her address was not broadcast publicly on video. She refused to use her face as a symbol. It was released as a document. Dry. Precise. Unemotional. It would later be known simply as the continuity statement. Its core assertion was devastating in its simplicity. We removed false necessities, nations, gods, kings. We did not remove the need for necessity itself. She admitted the flaw. Meaning could not be legislated. You cannot pass a law that makes people feel purposeful. But it could be scaffolded. She proposed the most controversial amendment to the Constitution yet. Not a return to belief. That door was closed. But the formal recognition of civilizational projects. Long horizon, collectively chosen narratives grounded not in transcendence, but in purpose. Projects spanning centuries. Terraforming, not just fixing the climate, but gardening the planet. Stellar exploration, not planting flags, but seeding life. Consciousness research, mapping the internal universe. Entropy mitigation, fighting the death of the universe itself. Goals no individual could complete. Goals no single generation could finish. But goals that generations could inherit. Long-termism ceased being a philosophy for billionaires and became public policy. Participation in projects was voluntary. You didn't have to join. But visibility was universal. Children were not taught what to believe. They were taught what humanity was attempting. The response was immediate, and polarized. Some embraced it as the first honest replacement for religion. Finally, a cathedral we can build together. Others denounced it as disguised teleology, a secular destiny myth. You are just reinventing manifest destiny without God. 5. The defection of competence. The empires reacted sharply. Because civilizational projects exposed their deepest weakness. Empires cannot promise the future. They are obsessed with holding on to the past. They can only extract the present. The ultramarine system, for the first time, offered something empire never could: shared inheritance without domination. Defections accelerated. Not governments. Governments were stuck. People. Highly skilled populations, engineers, researchers, educators, doctors, shifted allegiance digitally. They didn't emigrate physically, they stayed in Shanghai, in Moscow, in Chicago. But they realigned their participation, their labor, and their loyalty to the ultramarine projects. Borders became irrelevant to talent. This triggered emergency measures. The United States imposed digital allegiance restrictions, effectively banning its citizens from working on foreign civilizational projects. China reinforced its data sovereignty firewalls, trying to keep its engineers inside the Great Wall. Russia criminalized participation outright, calling it treason. The effect was catastrophic for the empires. Restrictions validated the ultramarine promise. If they have to lock you in, you must be in a prison. Repression created martyrs. The vacuum problem inverted. Meaning flooded back, but not under imperial control. End of nation-state stopped being theoretical. 6. The gray units. At the same time, a darker pattern emerged within the ultramarine territories. A minority rejected both empire and system. They did not want projects. They didn't want to build a starship or terraform the Sahara. They wanted rupture. Neo-primitivist cells. Anti-civilizational movements. Groups that believed humanity was a mistake that should be corrected by silence. Total rejection of continuity. Violence not for power, but for erasure. The system labeled them correctly, anti-future actors. They bombed the server farms. They poisoned the water filtration plants. They sabotaged the medical fabricators. They could not be reasoned with. They had no demands. They could only be contained. And containment reintroduced force. For the first time, ultramarine security units deployed. They were not called soldiers. They were not called police. They wore no flags. They wore no uniforms, just functional gray tactical gear. They made no speeches. Just enforcement. Quiet. Efficient. Legal. The moment was not lost on observers. The pacifists wept. The cynics nodded. A system born to prevent domination had crossed into coercion. Necessarily. Reluctantly. Irreversibly. 7. The inheritors. Inside a sealed council session, the final projection was presented to the architect. 2 centuries out. Every imperial model collapsed. Some through war, Russia. Some through demographic decay, China. Some through internal implosion, USA. Only one structure persisted. Not static. Not utopian. But continuous. Adaptive. Cold. Human. The ultramarine state. She studied the projection in silence. The lines on the screen were green, trending upward. Victory had never been the goal. Survival had. But now a deeper question surfaced, one no model could answer. One that kept her awake in the silence of the Brazilian night. If humanity survives by becoming procedural, post-myth, and enforcedly secular, what kind of beings inherit the stars? Administrators of existence? Custodians of continuity? Or something no longer recognizable as human? Chapter 10 ends not with certainty, but with a line she writes by hand, for the first time in decades, on a piece of paper that will be archived in the Museum of the Transition. We solved collapse. We have not solved meaning. The next century decides whether that matters. The vacuum has been acknowledged. The response has begun. And somewhere beyond governance, beyond empire, beyond ideology, the definition of humanity itself is now under revision.